Over the top, from a market sell-off that may or may not be overdone to the fury over a FISA memo that may or may not be overkill. So for the next 2 hours, we are on top of it all. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you. Happy weekend. I'm Neil Cavuto. Well, here's what we know right now on the markets and, the memo. First to the memo, the White House says that the president has no plans to fire Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, by the way, the only official still in place named in that infamous memo. Many Republicans say that the revelations of surveillance abuse are so explosive and a stain on special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation that they're calling for follow-up investigations. Others, like Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, calling for a special counsel to investigate the investigators. And now House Intelligence Democrats are demanding their own memo in reaction to that memo to be released. What does House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte say about all of this? Well, he's here. And only here. But first, to Caroline Shively on a memo that is raising more questions than answers, and our own Deidre Bolton on a market more worried about what happens on Monday than what we all know happened yesterday. We begin with Caroline. Caroline.
Hi there, Neil. This morning, several Republicans are calling for another special counsel to investigate how the FBI and the Justice Department got the go-ahead from a FISA court to spy on a Trump advisor during the campaign, while Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee want their memo released. Those Democrats say their document paints a very different picture than the 4-page memo put together by Committee Chairman Devin Nunes and his Republican staff. The GOP written memo asserts that the FBI abused government surveillance powers in its investigation into Russian meddling in the election. Much of the memo focuses on a dossier compiled by Christopher Steele that was used as part of the application to surveil Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. The document alleges bias by Steele, saying he was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected, and says the FISA application didn't disclose a key role played by Democrats.
The FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign in the summer of 2016. That's what happened. And then they got a warrant on someone in the Trump campaign using opposition research paid for by the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign. That's what this is about, and it's wrong, and it should never be done.
The Democrats say this is part of a bigger effort to discredit special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation and say the release of this memo is purely political.
The committee did not want to know the answers. It didn't want to even give the FBI a chance to respond. And that's all you really need to know. This wasn't about oversight. This is about telling a political story.
Latest, he tweeted this just about 15 minutes ago. Quote, "This memo totally vindicates Trump in probe, but the Russian witch hunt goes on and on. There was no collusion and there was no obstruction, the word now used because after 1 year of looking endlessly and finding nothing, collusion is dead. This is an American disgrace." One other note, Neil, Congressman Schiff says he believes the House will eventually release the Democrats' memo as well. That also would have to get the okay from President Trump. Neil?
All right, Caroline, thank you very, very much. We are going to be speaking to the House Judiciary Chief Bob Goodlatte on all of this. In the meantime, all eyes are also on the markets and the mayhem that came on Friday. Now, I don't know which is worse, that we fell over 600 points or for a while. It was 666. In fact, that's where it ended. Deidre Bolton on all of that, and what happens on Monday?
Yeah, what happens on Monday? My bet is on a rebound. We can talk about that in a minute. Right. I want to go over those triple-digit losses. I mean, investors sold everything, not just stocks. You had bonds, commodities, those markets selling off. But, Neil, you were just talking about these declines. I mean, the Dow down 4.1% for the week. Now, you have to go back to the UK's surprise Brexit vote, June 2016, to see a bigger drop. So it has been so long since the Dow had a triple-digit decline. In point terms, December 2008, that was the start of our credit crisis, last recession, epic Black Monday stock market crash in 1987. But before everybody starts tweeting at me that we are in an entirely different economic climate, which is true, than either of those two times, investors were clearly on edge. So take a look. We're going to show you this volatility chart. CBOE VIX index. This is a closely watched gauge of anxiety, basically. It hit its highest level since November November 2016. Now, some investors blame the negative tone on D.C. We're going to pull up a chart of the Dow, and you're going to see when that House GOP memo was released. There is an exact sort of point where you begin to see, here it is, 11:53, just before noon on Eastern time. And, you have this cloud over these areas that are supposed to be apart from politics, of course, the FBI and the Justice Department. Now, other investors say, okay, fine, you took a little hit there, but really what caused the market sell-off was worries about inflation and what the Fed is going to do in response. So January jobs report, better than forecast, fantastic. Wage growth shot up. So wage growth had been sluggish for almost a decade. Then it increased at the fastest rate since 2009. So it essentially means that the Fed is more worried, at least in theory, about inflation, or at least watching it, and may raise rates faster and more frequently than previous estimates. So if you take a look how the bond market reacted, this is usually when Fed fears show up, at least for investors. You had the yields at a 4-year high. The reason anybody cares about these yields or these rates is because essentially the higher these rates go, the more all kinds of borrowing gets more expensive, whether that's consumers for home loans or car loans or whether it's businesses. But as more sanguine strategists point out, we are in a 9-year stock market bull market. So even if this week has been brutal for you, if you have been in stocks for years, you have still made money. And, we just put up these levels for the past 52 weeks alone. You saw them there. But essentially, if you average the Dow, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ over the past 12 months, you're still up 25%. And if you were in since the recession, you're up something like 200%.
It is interesting what you mentioned about the memo and how the potential effect could be not so much on the details therein, but it could drag out an investigation. That's a fear of the unknown, what markets typically hate, right?
Right. And we always talk about this kind of cliche, which is markets hate uncertainty, but
right.
It's true. And with this pressure, it seems like this is a historic moment that we're living through, right? Where you have the
right.
FBI and the Justice Department normally, at least in our minds, kept very much apart from whatever partisan tensions there may be. And now with this dragged front and center, it does seem to be adding a little bit to the anxiety. And then as many people point out, listen, if you're in a 9-year bull market and you have a few days of selling, don't cry. You don't know how many people tweeted that to me.
Yeah, they always say, we're due for a correction, et cetera.
Yes.
Of course, when it happens, it's never a pleasant experience. Deidre, thank you very, very much. All right, so what happens next now in this memo that could or could not move the markets? Let's ask the House Judiciary Chair, Bob Goodlatte. He joins us right now, the first since the memo's release. Chairman, very good to have you. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Neil.
You have heard that a lot of people have looked at this and said, the only survivor still around in that memo is Rod Rosenstein. What do you think? Should he go?
Oh, I'm not going to call for action with regard to personnel in the Justice Department or the Federal Bureau of Investigation until we have all the facts and this investigation has been thoroughly completed. The purpose of releasing this memo on the part of the Intelligence Committee is to let the American people know that their civil liberties were abused in this process. And it is very, very important to understand that this abuse could occur in other instances. So the matter needs to be fixed. It needs to be corrected. I am hopeful that under the leadership of the new FBI Director, Christopher Wray, that will happen. But they have to get the facts out so the American people can see what occurred here. And this memo is a good guideline that shows how this information, bought and paid for by the Democratic National Committee, shuttled through their attorneys and then to Fusion GPS, and then getting into the hands of the FBI and weaponizing it and using it in a FISA warrant without disclosing to the court all of the tainted aspects of the information is just plain stunning. And that needs to be further investigated without any doubt.
All right. Now, you mentioned Rod Rosenstein and not getting involved in any personnel issues. The president has already made clear he's not a big fan of his. How would you feel if the president fired him?
Well, my advice to the president has been consistent on this, and that is to let the special counsel do the work that he was appointed to do, and to make sure that the Congress is doing the necessary oversight to make sure that that process is fair. but I would not interfere in this process at this point. The American people have a right to know everything that occurred, and when they do, decisions can then be made about personnel, but those should be made within the Department of Justice and within the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Now, you know, Democrats predictably were not keen on the release of this memo, but neither were a number of Republicans, including John McCain, who, like the FBI director himself, said he had grave concerns about its impact on the intelligence community, saying that it serves no American interests, no parties, no presidents, only Vladimir Putin's. What do you think of that?
I completely disagree with that. It is so vitally important that people understand that this is a very special privilege that our intelligence community and our law enforcement organizations have when they suspect criminal activity, to be able to go without the public knowing, put together a warrant application, submit it to a court that hears all of this outside of the view of the public, and make a decision. We expect that that will be done protecting the civil liberties of American citizens. And in this case, it very clearly was not. And it's important for the American people to know that that's why this needs to be investigated further, and it needs to be resolved in such a way that the public has confidence that these very, very important organizations, the FBI is the world's premier law enforcement organization. Tens of thousands of men and women every day keep us safe, fight crime, prevent terrorist attacks. It is a very important organization, and those people are not to be blamed for what several people in key positions did in a very politicized manner to promote an investigation and to get a warrant based upon the opposition party's opposition research and the connection between certain FBI officials and people involved with the Clinton campaign is astonishing.
All right, now, you know,
and
the
it needed to be
Democrats
disclosed to the court, and it wasn't.
You know, the Democrats have their own memo refuting a lot of the points that you just mentioned. They're angry that Republicans did not want that released.
I don't think they refute them, but
they might. Sure. You might be right, sir, but they have a memo they want released. Do you think Republicans should allow its release? The president should declassify their memo, get it all out there.
Absolutely. But remember, it has to go through the same process, the very careful process that the Republican memo went through, where it was released so all members of Congress can read it. That is being done now. I've read it. And then it needs to be carefully reviewed to make sure that there are no sources and methods disclosed in it. And then once that is completed, they should send it to the president, and the president should release it because it offers a very different opinion, but it also is one that should be heard. But the facts will ultimately speak for themselves, and this investigation should continue to reveal what those facts are. And it's been very disturbing to me that Democrats have not joined in the call for correcting this problem, because it affects them as well. I mean, this relates very much to the investigation that the Judiciary Committee and the Government Reform Committee, Trey Gowdy, chairman, launched several months ago into how the same director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, James Comey, and his cohorts handled the investigation into the Clinton campaign.
But do you worry that in so doing that this does potentially, maybe for all the right reasons, but it does drag on Bob Mueller's investigation, that be careful what you wish for, because at the very least, it's going to mean that the back and forth, the recriminations, and even the final results of Mr. Mueller's investigation are dragged out potentially for years.
Mr. Mueller is charged very specifically with looking at Russian influence in the election. Now, there is a whole lot of other things that went on in the election last year that are not related to that, for which there has been no special counsel appointed. I and a great many other members of the Judiciary Committee called several months ago for the appointment of a second special counsel to do that. And Democrats should join in that because of the fact that, after all, they were affected by this when Mr. Comey decided, for whatever reason, to publicly announce. He didn't have to publicly announce it. He could have reopened the investigation without publicly announcing a week or 10 days before the election that he was doing so. So this affects very important things.
All right, Chairman Goodlatte, thank you for taking the time, sir. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, you might have been noticing the market fall off here. You might have been noticing other news networks that suddenly took a great interest in what was going on in the market. Cynically. All right, now the markets are big news. Pardon me for being a cynic to say, looking at some of my colleagues in the media here, fixated on Friday's sell-off that they weren't nearly so fixated when stocks were rising. I'm not saying they didn't report that, but took more glee, it would seem, in reporting what happened on Friday. Is that fair? Is that balanced? Is that right? To the Hill's Joe Concha, who says, well, it's not equal. Joe, good to see you. What do you make of that?
I think it's amazing that our media in large has finally discovered that there is actually a stock market. You mentioned that they didn't cover it as far as good economic news in terms of stocks anyway. They had 70 opportunities in 2017, 70 opportunities in terms of record highs in the stock market. And the economic news has just been, I think, a little worthy of a little more coverage than it's had. The Dow up 25%, NASDAQ up 28%, consumer confidence at a 17-year high, unemployment 17-year low. Most importantly, what people really care about most, wages up 9% year over year. That's the greatest increase since the beginning of the Great Recession. So you put all that together, and the rule I've found, Neil, is that when the economy is good and it's touted by President Trump or his allies, actually there is a counter argument saying, no, this is actually Obama's economy and we're just along for the ride. Now, when the economy goes south or a correction comes, I can guarantee you this will become President Trump's economy in a big hurry.
All right. Now, many in the media were saying as well that, well, the president rode this market up and kept quoting it. He's going to pay dearly now if it goes down, because the same people are going to say, you own this market up and down. What are you saying?
I think that it was wrong for the president to take credit every time there was a record high. I get that, as you know, he's his best messenger, right? So he uses Twitter. He says, all right, another record high. Well, you know, to the point of, well, yeah, but if it goes south, then you're going to have to own at least that part as well. But I'm talking about the economy as a whole. The stock market isn't everything. And at this point, let's put it this way. There was 1 month last year, Neil, where there was 353 minutes of coverage to Russia on the broadcast news networks. The economy received 5, and that is remarkable. I'm not very good at math, but I believe that's 70 times the amount. But the bottom line is that when you have that kind of disparity on the number one issue that folks go to the polls and vote on every 4 years, that's a problem on priorities in terms of our media and its focus.
What I'm wondering about is you'll always hear a lot of these say, well, you know, we've always mentioned these Dow records when they were going on. Maybe our graphics people didn't always show it. It is what it is, and I understand the view that we're more inclined to cover the accident than the car that drives smoothly. That I understand. But, I mean, this wasn't even approaching balance, not even remotely approaching balance.
Oh, yeah. If it bleeds, it reads. And obviously, you go with the sexier narrative, certainly. The focus on Russia was completely disproportionate. However, let's compare it to something else very important that isn't. In other words, the economy isn't very sexy on broadcast news, evening newscasts, right? How about ISIS? All right. ISIS was the biggest story of 2015. You can make an argument with the attacks in France and so on, the attacks around the world. 98% of that caliphate has now been destroyed. 45,000 fighters down to 1,000 fighters. And that, again, we haven't seen any coverage on because we tend not to cover the positive when it comes to this administration. So is it pivot to the negative? I got to go. I got a thing. It's a Saturday, but it was great to see you again.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe, very, very much. And to Joe's point, it's what we're going to pursue in the next segment here. The media has universally bashed these tax cuts, disproportionately weighted to companies and all that. That's true, by the way. But they didn't quite see, in fact, the White House didn't quite see how those companies would share the wealth, including Best Buy just now. The story you're not hearing, but you should after this.
I seen like a $50 difference, $6. I was getting paid like $370, $390. Now I get like $470.
So far, I haven't seen anything different. So, I mean, I'm hoping.
I think it was like $80 less that the federal government took out of my paycheck, so it's pretty awesome.
Absolutely. I would say about a 10% difference. I'm not complaining.
A lot of my buddies have already seen increases.
Honestly speaking, my take-home pay has slightly decreased. Slightly.
No, not yet. I didn't see it yet.
Not yet. Yes, I did actually see some pay increase, but although it was not that much, about 4%, I believe. But yeah, whatever it is, it's actually for the good.
All right, it has begun. This is the month that you're going to start seeing a little bit more in your paycheck. About 9 out of 10 Americans will, most likely. The amount can vary depending on individuals and their pay and all of that stuff. But the fact of the matter is it has begun. Of course, this on the heels of a lot of companies sharing the loot with their workers. The latest, by the way, is Best Buy, which announced early this morning that it's handing out $500 bonuses to part-time workers. up to $1,000 bonuses for others, Hostess and AT&T, among the many, many others that are benefiting some 4 million workers across the country. More could follow in this sort of pay it forward theme, something that even the White House was surprised to see. Some good news that they want to see keep coming. With us now, Small Business Administrator Linda McMahon. And Administrator, you know, we forget how small businesses are sharing the loot as well in different ways by raising the wage of workers there or hiring more workers there. So on the small business front, what can you report is happening?
Well, I can tell you the enthusiasm factor and the optimism factor all across the country that has been ongoing all through 2017 with the anticipation of regulatory reform and tax reform, which are now realities. That enthusiasm has not waned at all. It is still growing. We're seeing we're seeing more loans at SBA, more loan guarantees, quarter over quarter, first quarter over first quarter from last year. Our lending is up about 20% in our primarily loans, which shows that continuing optimism for small businesses. And, you know, 2 out of 3 net new jobs in the private sector are in small businesses, and there are almost 30 million of them in this country. So that enthusiasm is really sparking more jobs, more businesses starting, and more continued growth for the economy.
You know, the good news can have a perverse effect, too, right? I mean, the market sell owed in large part, not to any bad news, but this kind of good news. Interest rates are backing up a bit here, and that is being used as an excuse to sell. What do you think of that?
Well, I am far from a market expert, but I know that when I am out talking to small businesses, and since last May, I've been to 31 states, and I have talked to over 500 business owners. I've toured their businesses. I've conducted business roundtables, and the theme is overwhelmingly consistent that tax reform is going to spur them to reinvest that money into their businesses, whether they're producing more goods and services, whether they're hiring more, whether they are increasing wages, providing more benefits. And I didn't meet with any businesses at all who said they would not be doing that. So the message that I hear from the marketplace is not necessarily relative to the stock market, but how tax reform and regulatory reform is going to continue to put more money in their pockets to grow their businesses.
Do you ever step back from all of this and see, you know, Democrats voted against the tax cuts, as you know, across the board. Some are even planning that if they get the majority in the House, they're going to have their own repeal and replace effort to get rid of those tax cuts. What do you tell them?
I tell them to listen to the people, listen to their constituents. Go out, do what I'm doing. Conduct these business roundtables. Step back from the partisan politics of it for a minute and hear what the people in all across the country are saying and what they're telling me. And the proof, I think, is going to be in the pudding. You know, there was a great deal of optimism. Right. This is what small businesses said. Now the tax reform is here. Regulatory reform is continuing. So the proof will be in the pudding, but I think you're already seeing. And when big businesses do what they're doing with their bonuses and bringing money back into the country, small businesses are the beneficiary of growing up around those businesses and supporting them with services. Apple comes in with a new plant with 20,000 more workers. There are going to be more small businesses to support those services and to support those people that come into those marketplaces. So I think this economy, it's all about growth. President Trump has talked about a growth economy from the time he was on the campaign trail, and we are seeing evidence of it. So I am very optimistic that we're going to continue to see this great growth in our economy.
You know, you mentioned the president, and one of the things that, you know, he rode this market up and quoted it often. And some said, well, be careful, because when it turns around as it did on Friday and last week, you own that as well. Do you think it's a good idea, one way or the other, for the president to keep referring to the stock market?
Well, I think the president will continue to talk about, you know, his growth economic message in totality across the board. And I think the evidence is there to back up what he thought would happen with the tax reform, with big businesses bringing money back into the country. I mean, Apple bringing money back and paying, what, $37 billion in taxes, and indicating to the president that they're going to invest about $350 billion into the economy. And We've seen Chrysler coming back with their plant from Mexico. So the primary issues of this economy that the president continued to talk about are happening.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to continue to see more of it.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what your husband's up to lately. Vince McMahon wants to start a rival football league to the NFL, one where it would be required that players don't kneel at the national anthem. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll tell you, Neil, if you want to talk about SBA in Washington, you can talk to this McMahon. If you want to talk about the XFL, you talk to Mr. McMahon.
I had a feeling. I thought I'd get that in. All right. Administrator, thank you very, very much. Very good seeing you.
Thank you, Neil.
All right. You already heard, speaking of that football game, I guess it's happening on Sunday. Fox isn't covering it, so do I care? Anyway, Justin Timberlake is causing a big old stir, saying, you know what? With the risk of concussion, I don't want my son to play football. What does Joe Namath think of that after this?
The only day I find it's worth getting worked up on the stock market is the day I'm ready to sell, which I'm not. And, you know, in a sense, I've been more than amazed at how much stocks have run up. I probably have a little general nervousness about where they're going to go. But to me, today feels like a bump in something. On the other hand, as interest rates move up, which they will anyway, it's inevitable stocks will back off some.
I generally find that billionaires don't worry too much about the day-to-day swings in the market, even when it could affect their worth and all. Steve Ballmer is among them, the former Microsoft CEO, is telling me that he is concerned, though, that rising interest rates, which are inevitable, they were already happening then. That interview, by the way, was prior to Friday's big sell-off when we were down in Washington for the State of the Union address. It is going to raise our carrying costs for all this debt, $20 trillion in debt that could exponentially hike costs hundreds of millions of dollars. We got Gary B. Smith, Deirdre Bolton, Adam Lashinsky. Deirdre, it is a valid point, what he's raising. You know, it doesn't take much to make that debt a lot more pricey.
It does not at all. And I think this is the danger also of President Trump tying his economic or his administration's success to the stock market, right? That's another theme. But as you say, it is going to make the debt more pricey. And I think we are now the top 5. If you put us on a list of all the industrialized economies, we're on the top 5 of debtor nations.
Yeah, but we've had some rip-roaring markets. Gary B., I mean, one of the things that he was warning about, that is Ballmer, is that we have to be aware that interest rates were ridiculously low and unrealistically so. So even if we get back to an equilibrium, that could be another excuse for the bears to say, well, you know, you want to get out of Dodge. What do you say?
Well, I think a lot of people are still viewing the Fed and inflation in terms of the 70s. I'm not going to say inflation has been banished, and by that, you know, the Fed having to raise rates to fight it off. But look at the landscape right now. Who can raise prices? Grocers can't raise prices because instead of going to the Publix near me, I then go to the Walmart. Gas stations are having a tough time raising prices because we're moving more toward electric cars. Retailers certainly can't raise prices because then you go, you know, find a better deal on Amazon. So I think the Fed will raise rates. I think there will be a little bit of inflation, which is only at 2% right now.
Right.
But I don't think it's nearly the concern that it was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
You know, the flip side to that, though, Adam, is that it doesn't have to be at an alarming rate as much as just a higher rate. So to Gary's point, he's right. I mean, if it's averaging 2% now, but wage growth, and Deirdre reported this at the outset of the show, is averaging now close to 3%. The trend is not inflation warriors' friend, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, I think there's no question that there's no evidence for needing to get out of Dodge. That's the good news. The economy is sound, and that's why we're in the 9th year of an expansion and a bull market. But there's also no doubt that the wage increases alone mean that we'll have inflationary pressure. And when the market is running away in a sort of unrealistic way, as it has been as it did for all of January, it's completely reasonable we would have a pullback, and we'll continue to see.
But is that a justified
pullback?
I know. To Deirdre's point earlier, over 600 points. We've only seen that 8 times. Percentage-wise, it's 2.5%. But it is what it is, and people see that, and over the weekend, no doubt, are chewing on that and wondering about what happens Monday. What do you think?
Well, I saw that the markets have pulled back to approximately January 10th. So, I'm in the camp, I think, with Gary that says, and with Steve Ballmer, by the way, who says people shouldn't worry about what happens on Monday unless they need their money on Monday, and then it's a different story.
Is that your view, Gary?
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying to most people, oh, go in and buy, but the people are quick to forget we still have these tax cuts that haven't even kicked in yet.
Yeah.
We still have an economy that's getting out of the malaise of the Obama years. I think there's a lot more positives here than worrying about what the Fed's going to do down the road, maybe.
All right. On that issue, I think it was the Atlanta Fed that was predicting we're going to have close to 5.5% growth in the first quarter. I don't know exactly what they're basing on. Maybe
even
the
the
tax
New York
cut
Fed
money,
is weighing in as well. But
so what would that mean? I mean, if that would happen, I mean, you would sustain something like that, you're off to the races. But what are you hearing?
So I think all that means is that, hey, different regional feds are also seeing inflationary pressures. And maybe this means that instead of, as the Fed has more or less telegraphed, for 3 increases this year, maybe it's 4 or maybe it's 3 at a quicker pace.
But those would be deemed good increases, not based on any hyperinflation or 70s fears. By the way, Gary and I are the only ones who could remember that period with the bell bottoms and the leisure suits.
Carpet,
I've got pictures, and it could get ugly. But we're not seeing that. But the uptick alone would be jarring for some, right?
It would be jarring, but we're still, in theory, talking about 1/4 percentage point, right? We're not talking about all of a sudden a wild increase. But
so
yes,
what are you hearing now? 3 rate hikes this year?
Yes.
Okay.
And, perhaps a little bit more hawkish of tone, or when we hear the statement a little bit stronger in language. But to weigh in with the panel as well, I mean, we are in a 9-year bull market, right? There are going to be dips from time to time. And I'm with you, gentlemen, in the sense that the underpinnings of the economy look good. I mean, the whole reason that we saw a little bit of a tantrum on Friday is because we had more jobs, 20,000 more jobs added to the U.S. economy, and in sectors that a lot of people were really concerned about for a very long time. So that's manufacturing, construction, and that's thanks to global economic growth. We're part of that.
Very good.
But the whole, global GDP is going up. That's great for American manufacturers.
Yeah, and we're leading the way. Very quickly, gentlemen, I'll raise this with you finally. Do you see anything about this memo and the back and forth, maybe even a suspended or elongated investigation that just drags the uncertainty out for months, gosh, if not years? Gary, to you on that.
I don't. I think a lot of this, as much as it's headlines for us and other news organizations, to the average person out there is impenetrable, and it's inside baseball, and they're concerned with how much am I making, do I have a job, is the price of my house, am I still underwater on my house? I think, like a lot of things in the Trump administration, this eventually fizzles away.
You think so, Adam?
No, I'll add to that. We've had a year of a president who behaves irresponsibly, who threatens nuclear war, and that list goes on and on and on. And the stock market
hear what he says about you.
Well, I'm good with that. But the market didn't react to any of that. It just kept going up, and that's what I see happening here.
The only reason why I mention it, guys, and not to make
to
light of it, is I think the uncertainty of it, especially their follow-up investigations, it just, well, this goes on and on and on. No one knows where it ends. But who knows?